What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 46 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast. This is always the show focused on gamers with jobs, families who have things to do in real life. My name is Chris Smoke, and as always, I am joined by the illustrious Mr. Aaron Connick. Sir, how are you?
I am awesome, Chris.
Very good, very good. In this episode, we have a really interesting topic, I think, to talk about. Does a story dictate a game genre? And we'll actually get into what that actually means in just a second here. But before that, the second piece of this show, Aaron, is my review of Metroid Samus Returns.
I can't wait. It's waiting on my kitchen table, Chris, so I need to know.
It'll be a good discussion. I can guarantee you that. Before we get into those things, let's take a quick moment to remind you that you can find us on our website at businesscasualgamers.com. You can also find us on the social medias, the interwebs, if you will. Twitter specifically at BIS Casual Gamers. That is at BIS Casual Gamers. You can also find us on YouTube. Just search for Business Casual Gamers. You'll find us there, or you can find us off the link on our website. And please want to take a minute to remind you, subscribe to us on YouTube, like our videos on YouTube, please, if you don't mind. Also take some time to go to iTunes, your favorite podcast hosting website or media, and please give us a review. Whether you like us or not, let us know what you think. We really, really do appreciate that feedback. And with that, Aaron, this is going to be an interesting topic. We're going to transition to our BCG discussion topic of the show here. And I mentioned before, the title is, Does a Story Dictate a Game's Genre? And, you know, honestly, I struggled with how to actually kind of describe this topic in a one-sentence kind of a wrap-up here. But here's the deal. So, you know, we've grown to see our favorite franchises over the past, decades, to understand them as representative samples for their respective genres,
sure.
Right? You think about Doom, you think FPS, right? You think about Uncharted, Last of Us, you think, third-person adventure kind of a game, right? But in fact, one of the things that I've kind of internalized, I just realized it recently, is that, after a bit of time with these games, it's really interesting. An interesting question kind of pops up. If you're a game developer, right, and you're going to do this, are you kind of pigeonholed in a sense to a specific genre depending on the type of story you want to tell? For example, if I want to tell a story about a man going through and killing a whole bunch of demons on Mars, am I stuck to be in a first person kind of a shooter category? Can we break out of some of those norms in a sense, right? If you want those thrillers, do you have to have it in a first person shooter? If you want to have that adventure story, can you take that adventure story that's heart-wrenching and turn that into a puzzle game? I think it's an interesting thought experiment,
I think so, because I think that part of what we've talked about on the show, I know you listeners who have been with us a while have heard a lot of gravitation or a lot more discussion about more indie games and smaller scope games. And I think a lot of the reason for that, and everybody who's been around the industry, certainly this past generation, has seen it, that the big genres, the big franchises, there's so much money going into the development of these games that a lot of times they are afraid to rock the boat. They don't want to. You mentioned Last of Us. When Last of Us 2 comes out, I will guarantee you, for every bold idea, wow. Well, you heard it here first. Like breaking news, right? That happened.
Exclusive. World exclusive.
Exclusive. But you realize that when they release that game, I will guarantee you that there have been a lot of cool new features discussed for that game. But with the amount of development budget that's going behind it, I will guarantee you there's twice as many ideas that somebody has said, you know what, that's not safe. I don't know if our player base wants that, and so we'll do that for a franchise that does not have as big of an expectation, as big of a following. I will guarantee you there's more of those decisions being made than, hey, let's take a chance on this. Let's try something different. It may not be exactly what people expect, but we think it's good, so let's put it in the game.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny, as I started thinking about this particular topic, this has been maybe a couple weeks in the making, I started noticing a lot of comments where people just plainly state, like, oh, Game X could only work and genre Y, right? And that, I'm just thinking, and we'll actually as we get a little bit further into the topic, we'll talk a little bit more about some counterexamples to that, in fact. And, I want to, and then, at the end of this topic, I think there's going to be a really fun section, Aaron. We're going to have a little bit of a quiz show.
My mind is going to be blown for us.
I'm going to quiz Aaron on some interesting takes and perspectives on some games in this same vein. So we'll get to that in a minute. That'll be really interesting, I think. So, the other thing that I wanted to mention here we talked a little bit about, over the course of many, many episodes, how, one of my spare time things is I'm kind of a indie developer of one. And, it's funny considering, business casual gamer mindset. I don't have a lot of time and I don't really play a lot of games outside of the assignments we have. But I am an indie developer in a sense, right? And it's funny, as I start building my own stories and the things that I want to tell, I don't usually start off by saying I want to build a puzzle platformer.
Right.
I want to build a top-down shooter, whatever. Instead, I say, these are the kinds of stories I want to tell. And I really think that's a lot of, when we think about the analogy here to the bigger game devs, the AAA folks, the Naughty Dogs, for example, I think it's probably the same way, right? You have an idea of the story you want to tell. The Last of Us, we keep mentioning it's a really good example of a story that's just like, it's such a gut-wrenching, interesting story about a man and his lost daughter, and then, how he kind of finds kinship with another little girl who is very similar, very powerful, kind of like his daughter was in a sense. And, at many points in time, I think a lot of people, a lot of those creatives tend to probably struggle with, should I take that story and just write a book about it?
Yeah.
Or should I just take that story and make a graphic novel or comic book about it? Or, do I want to make it into a video game? And if I want to make it into a video game, there are a lot of ways that you could, of course, try to bring the audience in and have them experience like the uniqueness of a game as opposed to just kind of watching something. And in trying to do that, do you have any sort of, whether they are implied requirements you might have with respect to genre, or are there ways that you can actually have, and again, so we talked about that heart-wrenching, kind of adventure, find yourself kind of a story. Can you have that particular thing in a strategy RPG?
Yeah, and I think you can. I think one of the things that drives a lot of the ultimate decisions that get made around this are, if I were to make Last of Us, let's say, the reality for most of these developers, and you see it over a lot of different games, is that a lot of developers are very hyper-specialized in a particular genre. Mm-hmm. So let's say I want to tell a particular story, and I say, where we're going with the sequel to this, it probably doesn't really belong as a shooter, an action game. Mm-hmm. Maybe we just want to make it where we take the weapon away. Maybe there's some adventuring, but we really don't want it to be shooter focused. Well, if they want to make it something else, then the problem is they have to build the physics for that, or they have to build the art assets. We only build shooters, and we spend all this time in investing in getting the shooting just right. It would be a shame to not make a sequel based on this, because we were counting on that to be part of our development budget. That hey, we got the shooting figured out, so we can just work on all this other stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily always the right answer, but I do think that just based on the scale and the scope of so many of these games, I do think that is something that drives decisions. And I think you see nowadays, when I see a developer that works across lots of different genres, it's actually surprising to me. Yeah. Because you don't see it, in part because it takes so long to make a game these days. Back in the day, when you have some developers who say, I'll guarantee you, when you look back in 70s, 80s, at the kind of the dawn of gaming, you had people that had a lot of ideas, and I'm sure had a ton of different stories that they wanted to tell. And there was really no template at the time to say, if you want to do that story, this is what the market likes. This is, people are playing this kind of game. There was no market. You're kind of defining. There's not a lot of samples to draw from, and so I can to bring that creation to life took a lot less time. And so, if you look at the, I'll call it the back catalog of some of the early developers, and a lot of times it's 4 times, 5 times as deep as a modern developer that has been around for a decade, but has produced or published or 4 games. And that's like a pretty quick pace nowadays. Yeah,
and this really ties into the episode we spoke about similar kinds of things, right? So you know FPSs, you keep doing FPSs and keep making that same game over and over again, turn the money crank in a sense, and reduce the risk in a sense, right? And I think you're right. I mean, it really does. The real answer here is it's more pragmatism on the part of the developers and the people who are the publishers, whoever's trying the money for that particular game, right? You have a team that knows how to make, strategy RPGs or knows how to, make JRPGs, and, you're going to go have them do a third-person adventure game or a top-down driving game, probably not, because it is more risk, and that means the money you invest into that project could be lost. And, I think that it's funny that we get into these kinds of harsh realities where you probably have a lot of creatives who want to do that, who, you see a lot of companies. In fact, I think Psyonix was one of the ones that was a company that was really good at taking kind of consulting jobs, and they're doing that to kind of pay the bills, but they always, in the back of their mind, always wanted to create something new.
Do their
own
of course, thing.
Rocket League came out of that kind of a scenario. And one of their own things is, hey, we've done this Rocket League thing. We kind of get this cars and this sports kind of a feel. Let's go do something different, right? Meanwhile, you've got the id Games, you've got Bethesda, you've got other ones that build the kind of game like Bethesda. You think about Bethesda, what comes to mind? Well, you're going to think about a Skyrim, like an Oblivion.
You're either holding a sword or you're holding a gun.
Or you're holding a gun, like Fallout, right? And I think that does a little bit of disservice to the creatives behind the work, but obviously it is the reality of business. And maybe the real answer is, if you as a person, an individual, want to go create a game a la id, then you're going to go, to id and work there on those kinds of games. But that's the thing. It's interesting to me to think about how we can break out of that particular scenario, like that particular kind of rut we're in.
I think that we're seeing examples, and we're going to go through some in a minute, because I do think that there are people that are experimenting and they're pushing boundaries, and even for a lot of familiar franchises, frankly. But I do think we're at this kind of tipping point where we say, okay, the market is saturated, right? Mm-hmm. There are more good games, frankly, being released than we can play. And there gets a point where I think a lot of times the interesting question that we asked with the show is, does the story dictate the genre? But I find a lot of times, at least what it feels like, not mm-hmm. sitting in design meetings for some of these games, I feel like in a lot of cases, the problem becomes that they're starting the other way around and saying, okay, what is, we think that first-person shooters are selling. We think that sports titles or kart racing games are selling. How do we make our version of this? How do we get a license? How do we get, let's start with what we think people will buy, and then let's put the story to get it. Something that is very understandable. So, give you an example. I remember it was actually a great interview, and I think he is a very good interview with David Jaffe. This is a long time ago. So, Chris, do you remember the game Calling All Cars?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so Calling All Cars. I remember him basically saying, "Look, I wanted to do this kind of quick pace, back and forth, casual game." And I remember he did kind of the cops and robbers. Mm-hmm. I'll call it the theme that he wrapped it in. And ultimately, I remember him reflecting on it and saying, at the end of the day, I started with, I wanted to do this cops and robbers game, and I thought this would be a fun way to do it. But at the end of the day, the worst part of the game was the fact that I think it underperformed what it could have done because I was so focused on this theme that nobody really cared about, mm-hmm. but the game was fun. Mm-hmm. But in his case, it's like I start with the story or the vibe and the world that I want to create. But at the end of the day, it became the least important thing. Mm-hmm. And so what was interesting to me is he almost kind of learned, like, hey, I built a cool game out of this, but maybe I shouldn't focus on the world or making the wrapping, I'll call it, of the game design as important. And it's something that I've always thought of to say, okay, well, he had this vision. This is a really talented developer who's done lots of different genres, lots of different worlds. Mm-hmm. And, if you think of going from cute cops and robbers to God of War, mm-hmm. I mean that's a lot in between. But to me, it's something where I remember hearing that interview and saying, okay, well, if this wasn't the cops and robbers game, what could it be? Mm-hmm. What did you say I want to, the idea I had for that was like a competitive vehicle-based game, honestly, in some ways like a Rocket League almost. Mm-hmm. I went that direction with it, but maybe that was a totally separate world I should have built. But the cops and robbers thing, there's still legs there. I think of something like starting with the story where I remember Wild West. Mm-hmm. That was something growing up that mm-hmm. I thought, this is going to be awesome. And then you say, well, okay, we have like Mad Dog McCree, right? I've got like, let's go light gun style, and we'll do it that way. And we're going to have shootout.
Light gun.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're going to have shootout at OK Corral, and we're going to give you a light gun, and we're going to shoot bottles on the screen. Mm-hmm. And then Rockstar comes along and says, okay, well, we think Western's cool too, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do something totally different. And that thing takes off and becomes this huge system seller. And, you know, that it is something that I find that you see now that the hobby has been around long enough, you see people kind of pick the same, what feels like the same basic story elements. Like if you were going to storyboard this on, you know, in an office somewhere, you'd say, okay, I think they may have been starting from the same basic framework, but they made two completely different games. And, you know, you kind of think about, like, why did they choose to go this direction rather than this other direction?
Yeah, you know, so maybe we're thinking about this the wrong way. It's interesting. So the point we're making initially was you have this story and you have to figure out the genre that the story can wrap around in a sense. And then what you're saying, and I don't only put words in your mouth, but I think it's, you know, in many cases, the gameplay or the genre is going to dictate, you know, kind of the fun essence of the game, right? The core loop of the game, and then the story is really nice on top of it in a way. And it's interesting to see, and I've seen your Jaffe interview is really interesting as well. It's a good point to make, because I've seen a lot of developers mention those kinds of things where they came in and they were so focused on that story element, that one little thing, and they made this game. And then, like you said, the fact that they still had to have that one little small nuance that they thought was cool, the one hook in the very beginning in the game, ends up destroying the game in a sense. And once they realize that they can get away from that, you know, then the actual game can bloom in a sense. And so, you know, maybe the real answer here is that you have, you know, you're kind of not working from one side to the other, from left to right or from right to left. You're kind of working from the outside in and trying to say, okay, well, there's some stories that I want to tell here, and we're not going to have a specific story, as in I'm not going to come into the game before anything with a script necessarily, like a movie.
Right.
And I'm not going to say this is going to be just this particular genre. This is going to be a sports game. Let's figure out how we can get this heart-wrenching story into the sports game and mash them together. You know, it'll be a little bit more of nebulous on left side, nebulous on right side, and figure out how it works. Now, I think actually we had a game that opened my eyes to one of these kind of crazy mashups, story elements and kind of a certain interesting genre. And we actually did our first BC plays on it, and of course it was one of your assignments more recently, the Naruto game.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because when we sat down to do the BC Play segment, if you haven't seen that, please go out there and check it out on our YouTube.
Really good video.
I really like how that turned out. It's going to signify, I think, a new way for us to kind of approach these kinds of, you know, game playing segments where you and I kind of banter back and forth and play games. It was funny because we sat down to say, okay, well, we're going to play this fighting game. And Aaron, before we discussed what we were going to talk about, and Aaron said, okay, well, I want to show the story mode. And immediately in the back of my mind, I was thinking, oh, my God.
Here we go.
This is like Street Fighter story mode. I'm like, oh, great. There's no difference. This is useless. But the funny part is, and again, if you haven't seen it, you have to go watch it now, because my words will not do it justice. There is actually a story mode. And it is so funny how you can see how the story is being told, but you're actually in the middle of a fighting game.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of a mismatch of two areas where, like, traditionally, audience, please, you know, prove me wrong, but I have not seen, up until this, I had not seen what I consider a really strong story mode in a fighting game. And you can say things like, okay, with the Mortal Kombat stuff, they do have more of a story than like the Street Fighter World Warrior Championship, whatever it is. But, you know, that was a really interesting example, I thought.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, let's be honest. Look, anybody who, I know we're going to get some messages of people saying, have you seen those Tekken 3 endings? I mean, have you seen them? Did you see Mokujin get uppercutted by his log wife? I don't. Hopefully, you've seen that, Chris.
I have seen that.
Okay,
one, yes.
You've seen Mokujin get the uppercut. That is like the consummate. All right, this is funny, or it's quirky, and so we're going to say this is cool. But as somebody who watched the anime for Naruto, I remember playing the games for the first time, and I said, to your point, hey, we want to tell this elaborate story of a ninja that's growing up, and he's, instead of going to school, he's getting trained to be a ninja. You know, he's not getting trained to be a doctor. He's getting trained in jiu-jitsu. And one could say, well, that can't be told through a game. But it's funny that after having been exposed to that story through the anime and playing it and just having that added piece of interaction, I found the game to be the way I really wanted to remember the story more than the anime. Like, I realized that I would rather replay these games than watch the anime because it has that extra level of interactivity with it, and it really only takes you through kind of I'll call it the key scenes in the game. And I think that's something worth looking at, where you'd say, okay, you had this elaborate story that people who, you know, spent years and years watching it, you kind of develop that deeper appreciation for the characters. But could somebody like Chris, who didn't, you know, watch the last decade of Naruto, could he come in and say, wow, this looks really cool? Like, I may not understand all of the backstory of all these characters, but I like what's going on. I like what I'm seeing on screen. I'm having fun playing, and I want to see what happens next.
Exactly.
Like, I think that is an absolute way that you could approach a new market of fans that aren't going to go back. Because we asked it on the episodes, like, Chris, what is the likelihood that you go back, even if you thought the game was really cool? What's the likelihood you go back and watch 10 years worth of episodes or read 10 years worth of manga issues? Nobody's going to do that.
I'm gonna like take a whole bunch of days off and just do that.
Yeah, nobody's doing it. Like, that is a binge watch, unlike anything that is out there. And it does not happen. That's why we're doing this show. So I totally agree. I think it's something that, to me, it was eye-opening when that series first came out, to say, wow, this doesn't need to be just there's fighting game elements, there are some adventure mode elements, but this is a better way to interact with this than just watching it. And I think it was telling.
So let's take this again. So now we've kind of come to this conclusion, I think, that there is perhaps the best way to kind of have this connection between different genres and different stories is to have a less defined story and maybe a less defined genre, and figure out how to put them together from both edges. So let's give some examples of what I'd call, I don't know if I'd call it like universal game examples, but maybe some games, some franchises, some environments, some like character sets that have worked across multiple game sets or multiple types of genres, because I think there are a couple examples. Yeah. Chief among those, I would say, Aaron, would be the Mario games.
Yeah, Mario is a great one, because Mario, what started as a platformer, where, you know, when you hear I'll call it the original design documents, you know, Miyamoto made a lot of adventure games. I think a lot of his early designs were inspired by him. You know, if you think of Zelda exploring through the woods, or, you know, something that is like, hey, what would happen if I did this in a game and made this kind of this altered reality that I could put on screen? But what started as a platformer has been anything from every type of sports game imaginable, you know, soccer, tennis. You have kart racing. You have Smash Brothers. You know, you can say it's not just Mario, but you know, clearly he is the key character. You have the Mario RPG, or Paper Mario games. You have absolutely
Mario and Rabbids.
Yeah, Mario and Rabbids. You have Mario and Sonic at the Olympics. You have literally every genre ticked off at this point. And, you know, it's something that I look at, and if I just go back to the original core concept, to see you have this kind of fantastical world, you have mushrooms, you have ice world, you have fire world, you have the Koopa children, like whatever you want to say, this is Mario. It's funny because as much as there are so many things where you say, okay, like I have to have Bowser, I have to have a princess in a Mario game. If you would have taken what you saw in the very first Mario games and said, every Mario game's got to have this, it's funny that the platforming part of that really doesn't end up being that important. As an example, I would say, so I didn't play a ton of Mario RPG. I've played it before, but I really, I played the Paper Mario 1,000-Year Door for GameCube. And it's funny because I remember walking away from that game feeling like this world does Mario better than platformer Mario.
Yes, it really
because
does.
it captures the personality of the characters. It's got more time because it doesn't have to focus on you're not focusing on platforming. You're exploring a world, and you get that quirkiness. You get the personality of the characters that comes out a little bit more, and that's something when I remember playing the game, I said, okay, they're both Mario games. They both featured the character, but if I'm Miyamoto and saying, what was my original vision for this world I wanted to create for my audience, I felt like he realized that better in the Paper Mario games than he did with the platformer Mario.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny. I was thinking the same thing, actually. I mean, you're right, and so you'd think that the story that they want to tell there are many stories across many kinds of things, but the story they want to tell there, be it a little bit, I guess, decoupled a little bit from whatever, from more of like a Last of Us story, an Uncharted story, or something that's a little bit more narrative in a sense. But you can really leverage some of those examples in the genre, some of those characteristics of the genre, I guess. To really tell some of those story pieces, but it isn't like, if you wanted to go tell the story about, Mario battling Koopa or, King Koopa or his kids, saving the princess or anything like that, like you have to have a Mario and Rabbids XCOM style, shooter, well, I guess strategy shooter in a sense.
Yeah, and one of the things, it's funny, if you look at some of the smaller story elements, you'd say, okay, the Koopas, you have these turtle-like characters. If anybody goes back to the original Mario or go any of the NES ones where you say, okay, I have this turtle enemy that I can jump on, and when I jump on him, I get a shell, right? And I can pick up the shell, I can run with it, I can throw it at somebody, and you're kind of telling this story of how do I interact with these living creatures, and even after I've defeated the enemy portion, there's still a part of them that's left over. And when I think of, let's say, the turtle shell in Mario, it's fun. People remember it, but it's not the main feature of the game. But then you take that to Mario Kart, and you say, okay, well, the turtle shell in Mario Kart, I mean, red shelling somebody has become a parlance for real life. Where I hear, I have a friend who uses that phrase often, and he's like, everybody knows what it feels like to you. I'm in the lead. Crap, the red shell. They did it again. I've totally lost this race. And it's something that I feel like if you're trying to tell this story or create this world, I almost felt like that element was so much better captured by having this in a racing mechanic that, it's not just, hey, I could jump on this Koopa's head or I could just hit him with a shell. This was like, no, I won the race because I used this turtle shell to knock out my opponent. Yeah. Or I made them slip on the banana peel. I think things like that where it's like you're trying to capture this vibe or this emotion or highlight this character that's unique to your world. I do think that genre can make a big difference in terms of bringing out the personality or really kind of connecting you to the mechanics or the feel that the developer was trying to go for. And Mario's a great example.
Certain genres give you certain opportunities to express characters in different ways. Like you said, the Paper Mario allows the characters in the Mario universe to speak and have long-form dialogue in a sense versus a platformer where you might hear like "save me, help," like you're not going to hear a lot of big dialogue back and forth.
And I think that's one of the fun things that, frankly, when you look at, especially Smash Brothers more than anything else, where you really have this game where if I'm playing Donkey Kong in his own game or I'm playing Mario in his own game, there's really no basis of comparison other than other games in that same franchise, right? Your expectations for Mario are, well, what did I do in the last Mario game? But when you bring all of these characters together in something like a Smash Brothers, and you have to say, I have to make Mario different from Donkey Kong. What am I going to do to distinguish them in the same game to make Mario like what makes Mario Mario? And I thought that game was really revolutionary at the time because it forced them to distill the core elements to say what makes this character special, and we need that to come out in their fighting mechanics and make Link needs to feel like he has something that is unique to him. The princess has never been a playable character. What is it that people think of when they think of her that we need? She floats. Okay, how do we put that in the game and make that a thing? And I think that was something fun that came out where even though you know these characters and you can identify them, you almost felt more connected to them after Smash Brothers came out because it brought their personality to life.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and it's funny. I have many of the same thoughts along the lines of the Mario games. Another one that's interesting to me, another game that I want to talk a little bit about. Actually, I was reading Jason Schreier's new book, what's it called, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Really interesting book if you're into gaming. How the development process. Whether you care to be a developer or you're just interested in how these games are made, it really sheds some very interesting light, sometimes negative light, where it's somewhat deserved, on the industry. One of the games that he talks about in that book is Halo Wars, which is another one, Aaron. Halo is something that's managed to kind of cross boundaries as well of genre, I think.
And people thought, when you go back to original Halo, people had no preconceived notions that Halo could be anything other than competitive shooter, like either team based or story based. But it was something that people would look at and say, "This is a shooter," and this world, all of the characters, Master Chief, everything that we've created. This has to be the story of your Master Chief. You're walking through a world, you're stomping aliens and whatever alien races come your way. And that's what it has to be. But Halo Wars came out, and you said, okay, well, Halo, there are parts to it where when you look at the larger scale of the war that's going on, why does it have to be the story told through one person? There's other, Master Chief-like characters that are out there. There's all these alien races. What if we made it a turn-based, or a real-time strategy? And what if we gave you that scope of, we have this larger war that's happening, and let you control multiple units instead of just Master Chief? And it was something that I remember at the time. Obviously, we've talked on the show. We're both big fans of StarCraft. I remember when it happened, I sat there and I just looked at the screen, hearing the story and looking at the screenshots and the announcements. I said, that's a really smart idea. I think this is going to work. I think this makes a lot of sense. Why didn't it seemed so obvious when they released it, but when you look back on it, nobody expected them to do it. I don't know if they expected to do it, but it was something that I look at and I say, it seems like it's so obvious because there's lots. They were telling that story all along of this larger conflict, and you can't really capture the scope if the whole story is told through the visor of Master Chief.
Right.
But so it makes story sense to me, but it was something that you said, like, okay, the real-time strategy genre, not as popular as the first-person shooter genre. And you wonder whether the fans who are loyal to Halo, are they loyal enough to follow it and play a game that maybe they don't like? Do they care enough to follow it and see kind of the fuller scope of the story if it's a game that maybe they're not attracted to? So I found that to be, honestly, one of the bolder decisions of genre crossing to tell to get to that storytelling that I've seen in recent memory.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And it's if you read the book, which I'm trying not to make a plug, but it is really, really good kind of description of how that happened inside of Microsoft and some of their first party developers there. So that's interesting how you're able to do that, because it was a pretty dramatic shift, I think, from what you would expect. You mentioned we expect first-person shooter, and they see something different, and it could actually. And I argue, I think Halo Wars did pretty well in the end. Granted, I didn't play a lot of it, but I think that those kinds of changes, they could. Granted, they could backfire and completely, this isn't Halo, I hate those kinds of things, could have that kind of reaction.
Yeah.
But it also could open up brand new markets for people who do love those kinds of games, that particular genre of games, but aren't FPS fans necessarily. So, Aaron, there's another one that I want to mention as far as games that kind of those kind of universal game examples, and it's one that you might not have heard of. It's a little game series called Persona.
How do you spell that?
I don't know.
Who makes that?
No, I've never played it. I don't think you have either.
Only probably a collective year of my life.
We should probably
maybe 2.
Okay.
3? Probably 2. We'll go with
15.
2.
15.
Persona is interesting because, Persona is a sub-series of the larger Shin Megami Tensei series. And so even though that it is one subset, all of those games were role-playing games for the longest time. And then Persona kind of caught fire. Everybody loved Persona. And the immediate next question was, how do we get people more Persona, right? Any great developer is looking to capitalize off a franchise and characters. And over the course of the Persona games, as you certainly experienced, you were playing these games for a long time. And if you finished a Persona game, it is because you really are attached to the characters and you want to see what happens. And what was interesting is the first big departure that they made was they made a fighting game. And that was something where at the time I was excited about it because I enjoy fighting games and I obviously enjoyed Persona, and I just wanted to see more. But what was interesting, you mentioned earlier when we talked about Naruto, they have much more story than any fighting game that I've ever seen. And it almost feels like, everybody who criticizes Persona, they're like, there's so much talking. There's just so much dialogue in this game. And the same complaint was levied against the fighting game where they'd say, wow, like this is a really legit story. This is RPG level of attempting dialogue and storytelling. But man, there is so much reading before the fight. And they're not wrong, but I looked at it as a Persona fan, the person who liked the RPG, and said, but wait a minute, like, don't take my story away. I want to see this alternate story, and I want to see all the dialogue. And so it was just interesting because you had hardcore fighting game fans saying, you made a great fighting game, but just shut up. Like, stop talking and just let me get to round two. Whereas I looked at it and I said, like, oh, I'm so glad they put story in. And, oh, I'm glad the fighting game mechanics are good, but I'm not very good at fighting games. So, like, I just wanted to, it looks good. I think it represents the characters well, but I'm not really good enough to, say, oh, like this combo is just put together so well, and I love how I can string from this. Like, I'm not getting to that level anyway, so none of that mattered to me.
Yeah, the trick here, I think, is you mentioned people wanting to capitalize on a particular, not necessarily genre, but a particular franchise. As you are kind of moving this franchise from genre 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, and you start getting like the Persona dating sim and things like that, you have to make sure
that's an idea, Chris.
I'm sure they actually exist.
I am ready.
I'm sure. Oh my god.
One could say the Persona games are already part dating sim, so maybe
yes,
there's
right.
not a. But they made the music game.
But
they made the music. Okay, so
you have to make these games not be terrible, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that one I don't think was great, but it was interesting when I remember them when they released that. I mean, you have something like Elite Beat Agents that I'm a big fan of.
I love
Elite Beat Agents.
I love that game.
And so when I saw it, I said, like, this is more Elite Beat Agents. I love Persona music, so I'm kind of down with that. And it ended up being a little bit more, just press some buttons along with the music. So it wasn't quite as deep as I think people who were really fans of the music genre or the rhythm genre. I don't think it quite delivered in the way they expected, but it did have all the songs from Persona. So it was kind of like this weird blend of music game meets Persona world with some storytelling coupled in it. And it's just interesting to see how they realize that people are invested in the world, and they're just looking for ways to tell more, side stories through every single genre possible. And yes, make more money off of it for sure.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. I mean, I think that you're right. They're probably not. They do want to make money, obviously. But I think that there are, to your point, there are ways to tell different portions of that story from different perspectives that you can't just do, like you said, if it's an RPG to begin with, you can't just do 15 RPGs to tell those stories. You really should look to find new creative ways to tell those stories through, like, interpretive dance or things like that.
Interpretive dance sim. I think that's what just got announced.
So a couple more things that I want to hit, just quick hits here on games. And these are kinds of characters, kind of environments that I've seen, we've seen, I guess, pop up over the course of the years. The first one I want to bring up actually is X-Men. You think about X-Men for like the NES, which is kind of a top-down, weird kind of shooter action kind of a game that morphed into a platformer, that morphed into kind of like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles style arcade beat 'em up. That's morphed into a many different kind of morphed into a fighting game. Actually,
fighting games,
right?
Yep.
Over time, and so I think that's been a Granted, there are a handful of games where X-Men or these Marvel properties have kind of shown up. They've actually done a pretty good job at being able to tell some sort of a story. You can argue that I don't really think Marvel vs. Capcom has really a story per se, but they have done a really good job of trying to transition these character sets across multiple genres.
Yeah, that's one where I'm calling for it. May or may not happen. I would like to see the X-Men virtual reality game. I think that would make
That
a
would be very
ridiculous. Like, imagine think of the PSVR, and you've got you're already wearing a visor that kind of looks like the Cyclops visor. Imagine converting that and making you Cyclops.
Awesome.
Like, I'm in. That's immediate sale right there. And that's something where you'd say, okay, like, how do you make it feel like you're an X-Man? That is what people want. That is why people have always come to the game. And now that we have technology, could you actually feel like an X-Man more so than ever before?
That would be awesome. I would love that.
I think I just sold myself on this game.
This is the gift that BCG gives to the community.
Right. So what I want to mention too, Silent Hill, the genre I've talked about a lot. I've always said I think the stories told through those games and the worlds they create are incredible. I think it's been unfortunately wrapped in a familiar third-person shooter, Resident Evil style game where you have inventory management and crappy shooting mechanics. And it was funny because, that's a game where I have said forever, I wish they would just abandon the shooting part altogether. And they actually decided to give this a try, and they made a version, I think it was called Shattered Memories for the Wii, where essentially they took all of the combat out of it, and instead of having a gun where you shot at the enemies, you were essentially defenseless and you just had to run. That game, I think there were also some technological issues with the game, but what I thought when I heard the announcement that they were abandoning the combat, I said, that's a great idea, that's exactly what I want. But I think the player base somewhat revolted because they said, like, no, I want to be able to defend myself. I don't like being helpless. I don't want to run away. I want to, if something threatening comes at me, I want to shoot it. And so it's almost like you see at times that even if the execution isn't good, people had it in their mind that Silent Hill has shooting mechanics, and I can't give up my shooting mechanics at the expense of the game. So that's one where I would like to see them revisit it because I feel like the game has always been trapped in an unfortunate genre.
How about another one? Here's another quick one. One that has been a platformer and a soccer game.
Yep.
Mega Man.
Mega Man, that's a good one. And you also had what was it? The Game Boy ones that was like part RPG. There was a Mega Man.
There's been all sorts of it's nuts.
It's funny because Mega Man is one that I go literally all the way back with to the first one. And so that is something that I remember when the soccer one came out. That it's not something I ever expected necessarily, but I do think that that's another one where I could almost see that being a Smash Brothers game too. To see you have
he's been in all sorts different. He's been in Smash Brothers. He's been in a lot of stuff. Yeah,
but even the boss characters, you see, gosh, we had this huge roster of boss characters that we've built up over the decades. Like, could you feel the Soccer Squad with Cutman and Gutsman and whatnot? Like, okay, I'm willing to give that a shot.
Let's face it, that's got to be more of a money play than anything else. But it's still, nonetheless, it's still a character across multiple genres.
I can see it. Another one, Resident Evil. Resident Evil, when it first came out, obviously you've got kind of a third-person adventure game with inventory management elements. But I remember when the light gun games came out for the Wii, that was something that I looked at and I said, wow, this captures the world actually really well. It creates that really twitchy suspense.
Yeah.
You felt like they were going more towards the spring-loaded cat horror rather than like, hey, let's do this fantastic story about this biological experiment. And so it almost felt like the more they moved the world and the story in that direction of, we want just kind of cool jump scares, it felt like the light gun model might actually be a really good model. And at the time, when everything had to have motion control, I looked at it and I said, wow, this was a really smart genre choice for a world that obviously everybody likes because they've kept playing all these games. And it's been interesting to see when they made Resident Evil 7, you took something that was considered sacred, which was the third-person perspective, and make it into a first-person perspective.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, when virtual reality technology is there to kind of save the day as well, and I've read lots of interviews and lots of discussions, they did not expect the VR component of it to be as big of a deal as it ended up being,
really?
Because that was, everybody I talk to says, like, yeah, the game's really cool, but like, you gotta play this in virtual reality.
That's what I heard too, and I still mean to play that game in VR. I think it would be great. Well, okay, I do want to mention one more before we move on, and this is one that we'll just tap very closely, very quickly. It's Crash Bandicoot, because we have had
Crash Team Racing.
Yeah, you're right.
The only game, and I don't want to hear about like Diddy Kong Racing or anything. This was the only thing that came even close to cracking the death grip that Mario Kart has had on the kart racing genre.
I don't know how close it actually came, but yeah. I mean, I think you're right.
Like, if you only owned a PlayStation, if that's all you owned, Crash Team Racing was the greatest thing that ever happened. Now, if you couldn't afford the N64 as well, I'm sorry. You missed out on the better game, frankly. But Crash Team Racing, it got you enough of the good stuff where you said, like, all right, Crash. It was a zany game. It has a lot of the vibes that Mario gives off in some ways. You could make the plumber boy insults while racing around the track and imagining you were beating Mario. So it gave you a lot of that feel good moment that you were looking for.
Next time you're going to tell me that. Next thing I know, you're going to be telling me that Bubsy the Bobcat was a good game.
Has that been announced? The Bubsy Kart Racer?
I don't know.
I would play a Bubsy Kart. God. Can we get Conquer as well?
No. No. All right, moving on. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen. Let's try something interesting, okay? And we haven't tried this before. This is a little bit. These are some scenarios. This is a little game show-esque. I think this is an interesting kind of a thing. Now, Aaron, you do not know. You've not really had some time to think about these. I'm going to give you 6 examples of a game or two, and then I'm going to give you a genre that doesn't necessarily fit. And I'd like you to discuss the outcome, what that looks like. You can pass if you like. Some of them will be a little bit interesting. But I'm interested, Aaron. So what do you think about Horizon Zero Dawn or Uncharted as a first-person shooter?
Okay, I'm going to give 2 different answers. So Uncharted, because every time I think of Nathan Drake, I think of Indiana Jones as like my word association. I would have a hard time being in a world where I couldn't see the character, because I always think of that game as a projection of a movie. Like, okay, different story, different character. That one would be hard for me to not see Nathan Drake running around, because every time I think of it, I think of, Indy running around, going after the Grail. So that one would be harder for me. I do think Horizon could actually be a really good first-person game, because I honestly think that one of the, I don't want to say weaker parts of the game, but the parts of the game that I felt like could be improved is any time that you're spending aiming the bow, they kind of give you the perspective of, like, they zoom in and it gives you some of the vibe. But I think that doing like a virtual reality game where you're going through a bow, you have that first person perspective. You're kind of stalking your prey. You're setting up the target. I think that could be actually a really cool first person game. So I hope they do make another one. I think that the game clearly did well enough to where it'd be probably asking a bit much, given like, okay, if it sold that many, why would we do something different? But I think that could be a really promising first person.
I think it would just be Far Cry. But yeah, you're right.
It could be. But I do think that the world is cool enough and unique enough where I think that told through the first person perspective, it could be visually different enough to be cool.
The only thing I'll say about the Horizon Zero Dawn is to this, Zero Dawn is, maybe 50-70% this, but definitely 100% Uncharted would be how you would handle those kind of climbing segments, because it's such a critical point of how Uncharted is. It conveys Nathan Drake and his associates as this very nimble, agile person who can jump from place to place. It's not necessarily easy, in my mind, to figure out how you would jump from ledge to ledge, how they would actually accomplish that in a first-person perspective. That said, I do think it would be pretty darn cool and probably even more scary, especially if you put that in VR.
Great point.
Moving on, I want to ask you, Aaron, about how about this? The scenario is Darkstalkers or Neo, same kind of a game.
Dark Souls. Yes. Darkstalkers would be cool.
Not Darkstalkers. Did I say Darkstalkers?
You did say Darkstalkers.
I
love Darkstalkers. So that's why you got me excited.
Darkstalkers is awesome. No, and it can't be a fighting game now. Dark Souls or Neo as a strategy game.
I think this can happen and it should happen. And I will tell you, there is hope for this. So Dark Souls was recently made into a board game. And it is I have not played it. I have heard it's really cool. And so I think there is something there. The fact that there are rules around, somewhat, again, not a video game, but there is a framework there to take it in a different direction and have it be more strategic.
Is it like roll the dice? If it's a 1, you lose, or you win. The rest of it you lose.
The rest of it you lose. Yeah. That would be fitting.
Okay.
I don't know how it would affect the sales, but I could see. I haven't played as much of Neo to know. Okay, how does it translate? What would the characters be? What would the different factions? Things like that. But I think Dark Souls especially, I definitely think that there is something there where you could have different worlds, whether you had, a lot of the characters who have been allies over time, or you could have different classes. I think that if you played on the class basis, I think that could be something that's promising. I do think that, to me, the world is cool enough in those games and I think the people like min-maxing in that game, and I'm sure it's the same way with Neo, where I think if you gave people that min-maxy option to say, all right, you're going to pick the right classes to send in battle and have a strategy, a strategy component to it, where it wasn't just, okay, I wanted to do a different playthrough or do a different set of stats, so I just have to re-roll a different character and do a new playthrough. I think there could be something there, and I think that Dark Souls has done well enough where I actually wouldn't be surprised if they decided to take that brand in a different direction. I think the board game is honestly, to me, the most promising evidence that this could happen.
It's going to be called Soul Emblem.
Nice.
Anyway, never mind.
I would play it.
Okay. This is a good one, Aaron. You're going to have to think about this in a little bit. I'm going to pick a specific game in this franchise. This will be Final Fantasy VI as a platformer.
Ooh, this is good. So, okay. Brief analogy, and then I'll tell you the exact level that came to mind.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This. So I think I knew you didn't reach the end of it, and I honestly haven't played it yet, but I've seen it. In Final Fantasy, the last hidden dungeon, if you will, Final Fantasy 15, the hidden dungeon at the end is no enemies, and it is a platforming level. It is an actual platforming level.
Oh my gosh!
So. There is a great interview on Kotaku where the one guy who reviewed it talked to the developer and said, like, I loved this level. I'm so glad you did this. And it was something that they took a big risk to put in the game. If I was to put it in Final Fantasy VI, the level I want to do the platforming is going after Go-Go inside of the Zone Eater. I think that like doing platforming in Zone Eater and you get to the last platform and the mime is standing there, I think that would be cool. So cool. I also think
we just finished it.
I do think we did it. I think the other place that could be really cool is Zozo. When you're climbing the different towers, I think that would be a really cool platforming area. So I think either of those, you want to make like a best of levels, I'm down.
It's done. Okay, moving along. Doom as a real-time strategy game.
That would this would be very. I'm trying to think of like what the units might be in this game. Is like the BFG a unit? That it is a sentient being
and a whole bunch of other demons.
That I think like you're solo, but they have multiple units that they get to select on, and you chainsaw them.
Yeah, maybe I have to think about that a little bit, huh?
I'm trying to think of what the units would be, because it's interesting. Doom, the later ones, like maybe you just get more Dude Bro Space Marines.
Be StarCraft.
Duke Nukem can make a guest appearance.
There you go.
He's looking for work these days, I understand. So I'm sure he needs something to do. Got some one-liners to dispense. That would be. I'd have to think about what the units could be, but I do think Halo Wars being. Something that you'd say, okay, if it could work there, it could work for Doom. I do think the enemy units would be really cool, though.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, Aaron, you are on a dark planet. To your north, you see a missile pack. To your east, you see Mother Brain. How about Metroid as a text adventure?
I know where we're going. That it's funny as you were mentioning this, like I'm getting myself into the world and thinking this could actually be really cool.
It could be.
I actually think this could work, and it sounds like I think that the fact that you're on this desolate planet, and I think this could work because Metroid as a genre is a series that, even though we've been through multiple games in the series, it's a world that I still feel like I don't fully know everything.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like I've been to these worlds many times. There's not a lot of exploration of Samus's character. There's not a ton of background. They don't overwhelm you in lore of like, how did Mother Brain come to be, or how did the Metroids go? Like, it gives you just enough flavor to have a jumping off point, but they don't give you too much. And I think that's part of what makes text adventures great, is it drops you into this world and you have to fill in the blanks with your imagination. So I actually think Metroid could be a really cool candidate.
I think we should just write Nintendo and they'd be like, this is a great idea. We're going to do it.
Yes.
We're just going to take all this graphical power. We've been, pushing
all that
on
money we make off of violating your copyright. Don't worry about that
Exactly.
at all.
Exactly.
Nothing to see here.
We're good to go there. Okay, last one. I think this is an interesting one because this is one where you have two characters that interplay one another, and the genre is going to be a little bit hard to go with. So let's talk about The Last Guardian as a puzzle game.
It's interesting because like there are puzzle elements, but if you stripped away I'll call it the platforming element,
You got to get the actual like the story and the connection between the characters in there too.
Interesting.
You can't just like solve a puzzle and move to the next room.
It can't be a match 3 Last Guardian. Okay,
No.
yeah, this could be. I remember in the scenes where Trico kind of goes crazy on you, you have to control it. I wonder if there's some tension you could create there with, okay, like how do you solve puzzles to calm Trico down, or do you have to navigate through a level while it's chasing you? Because you had the scenes where you were trying to dodge Trico as it came after you, and it's like, okay, you're trying to go and solve this puzzle to get away before a certain amount of time. That's a really interesting.
We got
one.
this.
You've had some interesting ideas.
So here's what we're
going
to do. We're going to create a new company called Business Casual Games. We're going to steal everyone's copyright and create these games and get sued into oblivion. But at least we'd say we did it.
Charles Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden would not exist without pirating the crap out of and
tremendous
trampling over
of
every copyright and player likeness that has ever existed, and then drawing a badly drawn gun on the foot of Michael Jordan. So it can work.
It's probably a bad idea for us, but then again, I am extremely happy that we have Shut Up and Jam Gaiden.
The world is better for us having had this conversation.
It really, really is, actually. Okay, well, I think that kind of does this topic to death. I think we've done a really good job of kind of going back and forth in here, and I don't know if we've actually solved anything here today, but it was a really good journey, I'd say.
We'd love to hear from you, the listener. What other ideas have you had to say, I like this game, I like this world, could it be something else? Could that Metroid text adventure be the next great idea that has never seen the light of day?
It's Game of the Year, baby. Next year.
Game of the Year. Yeah, we're stealing it tomorrow, making it. So with that, let's get into our game assignment. So speaking of Metroid text adventures, I do not expect that you're telling me that there is a text adventure portion. Otherwise, we wouldn't be making it. But Chris was assigned Metroid Samus Returns, the long-awaited 3DS game that is supposed to be a newer, shinier, dodgier, and twitchier version of a game that we've all loved at a game in the past. So Chris, like I said, I have already plowed down the money to own this game. It is sitting unopened because I wanted to hear your commentary before I took the shrink wrap off and decided whether to keep it.
Just buy 4 copies.
Exactly. Well, Chris, give me the overview. I know you were a big Metroid fan, and you go way back with the franchise. So give me your kind of initial judgment on what you thought.
Okay, so let me preface this first by saying that I have not. This game is a reimagination / remake of the Game Boy game,
right?
Not called Samus Returns, called ironically enough, The Return of Samus.
Yeah.
And so I've not played that game, so I'm not where some reviewers have spent some time. And actually, if you're interested in it, I encourage you to go look up some of those things. I think Retronauts and Jeremy Parrish did some work on that, on actually showing the differences between the Game Boy version and this version, and where those differences are and how it kind of parallels the original work. I'm not going to do that.
This is a new game to me, in a sense, and that's how I'm going to treat it. So just with that said, one thing I wanted to note that was interesting was I felt like this game was clearly made by a team that cares about Samus and that cares about actually, moving Metroid forward in the wake of the Other M debacle.
Let's not talk about that.
That's basically all we need to say. So, I like that. And before we get into some of the things that I didn't like, let's talk a little bit about the good stuff. I think the sense of power and the exploration sense is really still there. A lot of the things that you look at when you talk about a Metroidvania in particular, the exploration, the growth of power, the weak character in growing into a more powerful character stuff, it is still there. That's great. You still have a lot of the traditional types of weapons / equipment types of things. The morph ball, the high jump, various suit, all that kind of stuff is still there. So there's a lot of familiar feeling to a game like a Super Metroid or any of the GBA titles and things of that nature. You're going to feel at home here in this game. You're going to feel at home with the game and at home with Samus, which is really, really important. I think that the controls are streamlined in a sense as well. So you feel like, in general, and I'll get to some of the quirks I'll talk about, but in general, the controls are very streamlined. It feels very good to be able to control Samus. Unlike previous iterations, it's like Super Metroid, where you had the L and R buttons, or you use 1 or 2 buttons to angle Samus's gun up or down. And you kind of had that kind of, up at 45 degrees, down at 45 degrees, or kind of horizontal as your range of motion in a sense from firing. Now you actually have a button that plants Samus in the ground, and then the analog stick is used to move her gun, 360 degrees around. Okay. And I really like how that's done, because some cases they're just weird little out of the way enemies or things or blocks you want to hit, and you can just plant yourself and fire really quickly. Once you get better in the game, or longer in the game, and better at kind of working with the controls, you can almost seamlessly run into a room, pause, aim, fire, and continue moving, and it really doesn't break up the movement. So that's really good. I think that the same sense of exploration. So another core aspect of Metroidvania is going out and finding all those packs, or those missile packs and those upgrades, wanting to go search every nook and cranny. As many people like to say, like the OCD-ness of players, kind of comes out.
That's a key part of it for me.
It is a key part, and it's still there. I found myself still, and the levels have been built to a point where, every couple of screens you find a place that you are so enticed to go, and you really want to go there, and you try your best to get there, and you're almost there, almost, and you sit there and you think, maybe they just want you to be really good here. Maybe it's like you come back later, not necessarily with new gear, but you try a new technique, or you learn something kind of kooky little way, and you can get up there. Or maybe I'm still waiting to get that item that I don't know about yet that'll help me get there. And so those kinds of things pop up really, really often, and I really enjoy that too. That really is what makes it fun for me. The other thing that I'll mention is the environments are very diverse across all the multiple areas in the game. So like you might expect, there are some like hot areas, there are some cooler areas, there are some above ground, underground kind of areas, and that all feels very much like a Super Metroid as well. And so all that stuff is very, very good. I think in this case you might be looking at me or listening to me and saying, well, Chris, if the game is a lot like Super Metroid, then why do I want to play it? Well, it's important because the game plays like a Metroid, which is what you want in a Metroid. Sometimes you just have to make a similar game to what you're used to in order to bring fans back to what makes it good.
I mean, to your point, this was billed as a reimagining, but I would not expect that means that they made a completely different game that is unfamiliar to either the original or the franchise.
No, and they took some liberties, though, which is fine. Some of those liberties, I think, worked out well. Some of those didn't work out so well. So let's talk about some of the things that didn't work out so well. And I'll get right to the point here. The melee counter system is just absolutely abysmal in my mind. I hate it.
And that was the big feature that they, in all of the trailers and all the press releases, that is a big thing that they focus on.
Yeah, the best way that I can describe it is, we've talked about when the Vita came out or when the Wii came out. There are these motion controls, right? And how some games, I think I talked about the Uncharted on Vita.
which is a really good game. It's a really good Uncharted game, but they have these ridiculous touch screen controls and like motion control things you have to use in certain portions of the game. You absolutely have to use them to proceed, and that is absurd. I feel like they kind of did the same thing here. They decided, oh, this melee counter system sounds kind of cool. Let's give Samus a really cool uppercut kind of thing, and it can stun enemies, and that gives you an easy way to beat them quicker. You know, honestly, if that was it, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
And I would love it because, you know, you do, having that opportunity to do that would be great. But it's not that. It is clearly a point where, oh, we're going to give Samus this new ability and we're going to make her use it every section of every room of everything in the entire game, and it drives me absolutely bonkers. And what it ends up doing is, if you think about the core of Metroid, it is a run and gun shooter, right? In the beginning, you know, you might creep through the rooms slowly to figure out the lay of the land, figure out where the enemies are, you know, figure out how to shoot and whatever. But, you know, and maybe this is a speedrunner talking, but as you get better, you want to move faster.
Yeah, and you can run into a room, ice beam a bunch of enemies,
kill
and
everything,
keep
kill everything, not stop and keep moving and never stop. And there's some sort of beautiful elegance to that part of the game, and that is how the game works. This game is different, right? And I think I mentioned it before, and I'm going to steal a little bit. I'm going to reference Jeremy Parrish. I mentioned his article on Retronauts. If you want to look at, you know, really the funny part about it was I read his review, and I think his review really tied in with a lot of my views with the game going into it. The main thing he mentioned here is, and this is just the best way to really describe it, is that run and gun shooter we talked about is kind of interrupted. The pace of the game is dramatically slashed and interrupted by the constant need to stop, to counter, and then to move. And so think about this. You run into a room. There is an enemy, you know, in the middle of the room flying, and he has one of these. So the way that this counter thing works is the enemy will typically flash, give some sort of cue that they're going to do this. They're going to dive bomb you, and then as they dive bomb, you hit the button, and you uppercut, and you hit them. And then it stuns them, gives you the ability to kill them quicker. And, you know, like I said, in at face value, it sounds interesting. The problem is, distill that down to what it really is. It is in a game where you're supposed to be aggressive and continue moving and running gun, you're actually stopping, waiting defensively for this thing to attack you, and then you might do it 3 to 4 to 5 times in a given room. And okay, the speedrunner in me would say, I don't care, I'll just run right through them, take the hits. Okay, cool. That actually doesn't work very well. They balance the game against this, thinking that you would do these counter things, so that if you get hit, especially when they're doing these kinds of charge things, you take an inordinate amount of damage. And
so it forces the issue.
Yeah, it really forces the issue. They really want you to use it, and I have not found, at least not right now, I've not found a good way to do that. So again, the enemies deal so much damage that it's really, you can't really ignore them. You have to play into the melee counter system, and essentially that melee counter system is a defensive, passive kind of motion where you have to wait on an enemy to do something, and that really drives me nuts. It really, you know, doesn't do it much
and
for me.
So that is the primary form of combat in this game, would you say, at least based on what you've experienced so far?
Yes, that is the primary form of combat. And I'll tell you, you know, I have not finished the game. This is I'm a massive Metroid fan, massive. You can't, you know, see the room around me. If those of you in the video, you probably haven't seen the rest of the room, but I have no less than probably 15 different Samus figures in this room. I have Metroids everywhere. I love this game. I want to love this game. But it really, I played a couple hours, 3-4 hours, and I put it down, and I haven't picked it back up. I can't bring myself to want to go through that garbage again. And I will eventually force myself to beat it, but it's still difficult. So let's move on a little bit. They have these abilities called Ion abilities or Aeon abilities that are focused on, you know, helping you find hidden blocks, which I think is cool. They have some defensive mechanisms, some offensive mechanisms, things that are pretty cool. They're not necessarily anything groundbreaking, but they're interesting to keep around, and I like them. The issue I have with the Aeon abilities is that they're actually turned on and off by the D-pad.
Okay.
So you get 4 of them, and you can turn them on and off based on that D-pad. Now, the problem with that is, and you might know where I'm going here, is that because the D-pad is taken up by these Aeon abilities, you can't actually use the D-pad to control Samus.
that bothers me a lot because there are many cases where that analog stick just isn't good enough for some of the quick maneuvers you want to do, for like a jump, double tap down to turn into a morph ball in the air. You can't actually do that, and that drives me absolutely crazy that I can't figure that. I can't figure out a way to do that, and I just feel like, despite the fact that the controls have gotten better, that analog stick does hold me as a player back. I don't know how other people think about it or not, but that's what bothers me.
And are you using these powers fairly frequently?
Not really. I'm using them every once in a while when I feel like I need to find, I might need to find an extra way out of a particular room that's hidden.
Okay.
If it's something like, so they, for example, they have one that is, that's like a defensive shield that consumes, the Aeon ability, the Aeon charge in a sense. And there's a power bar that you can choose. It consumes that. So basically you set it and forget it until it goes away. A couple other different things there I won't spoil, but really you're not using it all that often, and it would be very easy for me in my mind, like, to take some of the extra buttons you have on this 3DS XL or whatever else you're probably playing it on and just map those, or have the ability to map it around. I don't think there's a way to do that, so that's frustrating. The last thing I'll mention is the boss battles, and I think that it pains me to say this, but they do get really frustrating. I've only went through a handful of types of boss battles, although I've probably been through maybe 15, 20 of them, the battles themselves. Without spoiling too much, basically, you're there to rid the place of Metroids. So your bosses are effectively Metroids. And, they take over various inhabitants of or monsters, I guess, on the planet, and they attack you with them. And based on whatever they take control of is what you fight. Okay. Interesting kind of a scenario, and I think it's really good. The problem is the way that they, I like to be very aggressive when I fight bosses. So I'll die more often, but I'll be really aggressive, try to beat them very quickly. You can do that in a sense here, but more along the lines of what really it boils down to is my age-old most desirable trait of bosses, for a la Neo and Dark Souls, is we're going to take X minutes to kill a boss, period, just because it needs to take X minutes. Now, it doesn't approach the level of 10 plus minutes like the Kojima, like the Metal Gear Solid thing, or the Neo kinds of games. But it gets pretty dangerously close in my mind. And so imagine this, you have a Metroid, which is basically is taking over this little enemy, looks kind of like a flying, roly-poly in a sense, or playing Pillbug and whatever. And they're flying through the air, and they do these swoops from left to right, swoop down, left to right, then right to left, and back and forth. And with each one of those swoops, they have a chance to electrify themselves, in which case you have to dodge. Or they have a chance to flash, in which case, you have to do your stupid uppercut combo melee move to stop them and then unload on them as they're stunned. And so, they may do 5 or 6, 7 passes, it seems random, before they finally do their flash and you're able to hit them. And that's the rub of it. That's the gist. And that happens at least the first 8, 10 Metroids you fight, it's very much like that.
And that's interesting because when I think of Super Metroid as a good example, Ridley, Kraid, the Ghost Ball, these are iconic boss battles where I really think of it and I say, it's not the only thing I like about the game, clearly, but those were really signature moments and signature characters that all these years later, I haven't played Super Metroid through as recently as you, but I can snap off the bosses and where they are and what's going on in the environment and how the battle plays out. And the fact that they didn't really deliver in a way where that's not like the first thing you're talking about, that to me just seems like it's a step back based on the fact that it didn't grab your attention as much as something like a Super Metroid did. Because let's face it, the technology that is available to them, yes, it's a portable game, but the 3DS is way more powerful than the Super Nintendo ever thought about being. So there's no limitations at this point where that couldn't be accomplished. So I do find that surprising that didn't have the kind of signature moment that you'd expect out of a Metroid game.
Yeah, and admittedly, I haven't beaten the game, so maybe it gets better. But, in the 3 or 4 hours I've played, it's been very repetitive. I've only faced 2 different types of bosses in a sense. And, like I said, I'm the kind of person that wants to be able to go in there very aggressively. And you can't do that. The last thing I'll mention on this is that,
speaking to that point about how you can't be really aggressive, is if that boss hits you, I mean, it takes off so much health. Like, you can very easily go into a boss battle without full health and get 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot. And that can happen very, very, very easily if you're not careful. And that just doesn't seem... Not that I want the game to be easy. I'm not asking for it to be easy. I'm just asking for it to be tweaked a little bit to make it so that I can be a little bit more aggressive. But when I'm playing the game normally, it's not like I get so freaking bored, I'm about to fall asleep because I'm waiting for the fourth pass that I forget to jump and I get hit and I die. That's something that shouldn't happen in my mind.
Interesting.
Overall, though, I still think that this game should be played. I know there are some... I'm making the negatives sound like they're overall, overwhelming the thing. But if you accept the fact that Metroid has changed a little bit in how it's played, it's a little bit more defensive, a little bit more wait for it, passive in a sense. But there's still a lot of Metroid quality focus areas in the game. I still think it's fun to play. I will go back and probably beat it here soon. But it will not be... It's still not as good as Super Metroid, and that's what I was looking for. Something that lives up to Super Metroid at least 90%, and it's probably 70% of Super Metroid, if that.
Super Metroid to me is the gold standard of the series. If you had to compare it to, let's say, the Metroid Prime games, would you still put it... I mean, I know 2D versus 3D, very different. It's hard. If you just had to say, okay, Chris, you've got 10 hours next week to play a Metroid game that's not Super Metroid, are you reaching for a Prime game or are you reaching for this?
So I'll preface this by saying that I am not, and we'll talk about this in an episode at some point in the future, I'm sure. I'm not a super big fan of the 3D types of games. Okay. So I would probably play this more. That said, I think for normal people, Prime is probably a better option. Okay. I just have problems with like some of the 3D lock-on kinds of things in early Prime games. I had issues with that frustrated me a good bit, and I think it frustrated me more than this frustrated me. But it's probably a toss-up. I'd probably play the 2D just because I want the 2D to be Super Metroid, even if it's not.
No, that's totally fair.
But yeah, that said, I think play the game. I think maybe it's one of those things where, Aaron, don't return your game. I would say play it.
Okay, so here's the most important question. This is a lot. I have a shrink-wrapped copy of this game, keyword being shrink-wrapped, that I could return. I could press the button on my phone right now to return this to Amazon. I could have $40 back in my pocket plus tax, and I could go on my merry way and buy whatever other wonderful games that I don't have time to play that could sit on my shelf. Would you, knowing what you know, if you said, okay, you can undo all of this and just go play, I own every Metroid Prime game, I own Super Metroid, I own all of the GBA games, I could play any of those games, and I wish I had more time to go through and play all of them, but I don't. Would you still keep this game knowing what you know?
I probably would.
Okay.
I probably would. And I think that maybe I might be too harsh on it, but, no game's perfect. I'd say play it. If you already have the game, keep the game, play it. If you don't have the game, maybe, Nintendo games may not come down in price, but maybe wait a couple months and see if 3 or 4 months it comes down to 30 or 25.
I think what I'm going to do before I make a decision, I want to see a little bit more of the specific, the parrying, if you will.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I want to see like a sample battle to say, okay, like what does this look like? How extensive is this? Mm-hmm. Because I think of all the things you said, that was the one that stood out to me as that doesn't necessarily feel like what I'm looking for. So let me see it in action. I'll keep my finger off.
You'll have to report back to us what happens in the end. All right. Well, so that's Metroid. Like I said, let us know. We'd love to hear what you think about it. If you've played the game, if you're thinking about playing it, let me know if you think I'm wrong. I know it seems like if you go to the Metacritic or you go to other places, it's getting reviewed very, very highly.
Okay.
So there could be a little bit of Chris is crazy here.
Yeah, there could be a little bit of Nintendo fan club.
Could be as well. It is a good game, to be sure, but it is not a great game in my mind.
Okay.
So with that, next episode, Aaron, you get a game for the 3DS as well. This is a game that I've heard you mention before. I don't actually know too much about it. But this is called Concept Revolt.
So this one, I actually, as we are recording this game is arriving on my doorstep. I will tell you, in a year that has had some heavy hitter games, I mean, this is a year that delivered Persona 5. So, like, this is a year where the big games have come out for me. I honestly have higher hopes for this game than any other game that is on my list for this year. If you haven't played Coldcept before, I will describe it a lot more in the review to give you some context for the game. But I will tell you this. The game, just Coldcept as a game, really checks a lot of boxes for me.
Interesting.
They have not. The last one of these games that I played was a PS2 era game, so it has been a long time. I did not play the Xbox one. I know Japan gets these games. I have not approached this franchise in a long time, so I am really curious to see what they've done with it with that much time.
Wow. Yeah, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that one. That'd be a very interesting one. And, I know one thing I'll mention before we roll out of this episode, we appreciate you. Realize that we were a couple days late on this episode. We had some travel schedules we couldn't rearrange. That's going to happen from time to time. But, of course, we have some other things to show you on YouTube that'll be fun. Another one coming at some point here soon. Let me remind you, Aaron, not you. Let me remind the audience, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, you can find us at our website at businesscasualgamers.com. You can also find us on Twitter at BISCasualGamers. That's at BISCasualGamers. Please take the time to go check us out on YouTube. We mentioned we have a new BC Plays segment that we're starting. I have a second one coming, like I mentioned, at some point here soon. Please take the time to like, subscribe, comment, do all the fun things there. And as well, please take the time, if you don't mind, to go into iTunes, go into all the Google, Stitcher, all those. Comment for us, rate us. It really, really, really helps us out. And we really appreciate those of you who have done that already. We know we've gotten a lot more subscribers on our YouTube channel and other things. I've seen quite a bit of positive movement there over the last couple of weeks. So we really do appreciate that. Thank you very much for everything you do, and we will see you next time.
See you soon.